So I wanted to see, oh, there are your faces. Hi, everybody. I switched views. Hey, do you see each other? You see how nice you look? This lovely Arab Shavuot evening. Hi. Hi, Simone. Hi, Sue Cohen. Hi, Rosa. Who else is here? Yay. This is all about, my whole session is going to be about checking in different ways. Oh, I'm seeing your faces. Look at your smile, Gloria. Look at all your beautiful faces. Wow, there are 10 whole things. Okay. Hi, Rabbi Alicia Harris to me. Nice to see you. Okay, great. And then a bunch of people aren't on video. So what I will say is it's so good to be here with all of you. And I invite everyone, if it hasn't already been said, at least especially while you're in this session with me and also in others too, to do what makes you feel comfortable during the session. So I'll be looking to see your faces and engaging with you, and do whatever you need to in order to make the most of this session. So I appreciated my Jewish Learning's openness to me trying on a new session with all of you. Oh, that's right. I'm looking at this, sorry. So in some ways I'm always looking at you, but sometimes I'm looking at my cell phone and sometimes I'm looking at my laptop. Sorry about that. But I'm going to try on a new session with you. So as some of you may know and was said earlier, I have about 17 years of lay and professional experience in the Jewish community. Well, more years in terms of lay, but professional and training experience in the Jewish community around subjects of Jewish belonging and racial justice and Jewish identity and the Ashkenazi Jewish experience as it relates to different sociological patterns. But in honor of it being Shavuot, which is such a sacred and joyous holiday, I'm totally switching gears here and sharing brand new content from me with you today. So that is both thrilling and terrifying and tender for me, and I'm happy to have you on this journey. So enough of me talking about it. Let me actually talk about the thing instead of me talking about the thing. So it sounds like I heard the last 10 minutes, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg set the stage for, we are really honoring and celebrating this concept of collective revelation in terms of our people receiving the Torah. And I wanted to invite us to have collectively and also individually a more softer and internalized or internal conversation with each other of tapping some of our own internal journey and insight and Torah around what does it mean for us when we receive revelation in our lives today. And I wanted to take some time to look at a couple examples in the Torah around how that process was managed with those particular biblical figures, and then also look to different elements of our Jewish tradition for insight and ideas around practices that we can engage to help us surface and process and make good and meaningful use of divine revelation that we receive, however that comes. So with that, let's see here. I think what I want to start with is two main examples, and in a moment I'm going to share screen and hopefully this will work. And there are two models that I want to give. And throughout this session, by the way, oh, I forgot to do that earlier. I did the embodiment piece. I didn't get to see you. I'll do it yet because I hadn't discovered that I could see you yet. But I want to have, for those who are comfortable, I want us to really engage in the chat section. And for those whose minhag or tradition it is to not engage that much in technology, everything that we're engaging in the chat, you can engage via a contemplative practice with your own thoughts and reflections, or if those who would find it meaningful, if you have a pen and paper, you can feel free to journal throughout this and just join the conversation. Okay, so I want to look at two primary instances of revelation or engagement where a biblical figure in the Torah received a message from the divine around actions they were meant to take, or around insight that would help them in their leadership or a purpose they were meant to fulfill. So I wanted to first give folks an opportunity to share in the chat box or to reflect in your own mind around what are some of those scenes. I've selected 2, but there are many. And so I just love to surface a number of them or many of them if possible. So feel free to enter that into the chat box if you feel so inspired, or to write that or think about it. And I'll give you a moment to do that. And I'll try to lift some of them up. Someone wrote to me privately, which I appreciated. I am very early in the process of conversion, and this holiday resonates with me. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, lovely person. Ezekiel in the Valley of Dry Bones. I'll give you another couple moments to offer anything else up. Oh, and the question again is moments in the Torah where a character is receiving a divine message, whether audibly, internally, and is receiving some directive around how to move in their life or actions to take. And while people are entering that into the chat, I will add a piece that I forgot to mention that was core to part of my premise for this talk and this conversation, this Jewish conversation, is that I'm specifically, part of the reason why I'm interested in bringing this conversation and discussion to all of you is because of what we are collectively navigating around COVID-19. And I don't know about for any of you, and feel free to enter this in the chat. At times when I say enter this in the chat, I want you to take that to mean either put something in the chat box, reflect on it personally, or journal. That's shorthand for all of those things, okay? So also feel free to comment in the chat section about this. If what I'm saying resonates with you, maybe you type in revelation. If I've noticed among some of my friends and myself that in the midst of being in quarantine, that I've had a heightened attention internally. At times things have been getting increasingly faster over Zoom and different things professionally, but also this has been a moment of slowing down and the traditional lifestyle being completely disrupted, which has, in my own personal life and in the lives of some folks I know, caused a rupture that has allowed an opening for me to pay more attention and be receiving different insights and reflections about my life and my work and how to move forward in it. And so I would welcome anyone to also write in comments about if that is resonant for you too. Great, so thank you. People wrote in a ton of different examples. And the 2 that I want to particularly lift up, I think both of which were named. Great, thank you. So people, please continue to comment. And if you also see something interesting that's happening in the chat, also feel free to engage with other folks too. I welcome the cross-pollination. Or you can just listen to me, whatever's most meaningful. So, okay. The 2 examples that I want to lift up come from 2 of our biblical patriarchs around Abraham ben Abram in the Lech Lecha scene and Moses with the burning bush. And I want to dissect these scenes and look at them and consider them sort of in reverse order, starting with Moses and then moving to Abraham. As sort of possibly, as one might say, we're Jewish, so when people may disagree, sort of 2 ends of the spectrum of how one may integrate and synthesize divine insight. And when I say divine insight, to be clear, I have a very specific personal understanding of what that means, and that has been actively evolving over the last 7 to 10 years. But I think that term, coming from my vantage point as having been raised as a Reformed Jew, can mean different things to different people. At times, it can be viewed quite literally as someone believing that they've received a message from the divine, from God or another spiritual spiritual energy more broadly, or it may be your own internal voice and wisdom. So when I say personal divine revelation, it can mean that as well as other possible similar meanings, and I allow you to decide what that means for you. Okay. So, oh, interesting. So are the chats public, or are they just coming to me?
So people can send chats to you or to one of the hosts at My Jewish Learning, but not to each other.
Okay. Oh, okay, right. But are they publicly shared, or no? It's just internal. Oh, okay, great. So then I really have to lift it up. Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who noted this. So examples that were given out were Daniel and Isaiah, and I saw something about Abraham and Lech Lecha, and I believe I also saw Moses. So there are many different instances. And I want to start by reviewing the scene with Moses in Shemot, and specifically partially the tail end. So if we pull up the text, the classic burning bush text, which is one of my most beloved texts. It's so rich with meaning and symbolism. And we're not going to do a super deep dive or text study here. We're just going to simply look at one English translation. So let's see here. Okay. So let's, okay. So in a moment, you should be able to see this on the screen. Wait for it, wait for it. Okay. Okay. Are you seeing this here? I think so. Okay. So now the specific piece that I want to look at. So we see here that Moshe or Moses is in the desert with his flock of his father-in-law, Yitro or Jethro. And let's see here. So let's just look at the text. So here in verse 2, we see it says, am I able to highlight? No. An angel of the Eternal appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, quote, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? When the Eternal saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush. Moses, Moses, he answered, Ki Nene, here I am. So we have this scene where there's this burning bush and an angel is speaking, and initially Moses is excited and responds directly to that engagement, that invitation to engage with spirit, and says, Ki Nene, here I am. I am present. I am here. And yet we see that Moses's presence doesn't remain in that sort of energy for very long as the passage continues. And God said, do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. And continued, quote, I am the God of your father's house, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And here's the key part. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So there is this sort of fear and terror we see, or fear, I don't want to say terror. I don't want to editorialize too much, but a fear that we see. So initially there's a here I am, and I don't know if any of you can relate. Feel free to enter it in the chat, and I'll try to amplify some of your chats to me back out to the group. But I can certainly relate to this at times, where there's a sort of twofold approach at one end of the spectrum, where I clearly have metaphorically or at times literally heard a message that I've received, whether it was a song or something meaningful or something that clearly triggers me, that I immediately understand and interpret as, yes, this is a message. But then for me, in my case, I don't know if this was happening for Mo. At times I like to be a little humorous, so at times I like to call Moses Mo. But you know, this may or may not have been what Mo was thinking. But then at times my mind kicks in and is like, oh, this is impossible. There's no way this could happen. Maybe I'm not stable right now. Maybe I'm making it up. I don't know. I just need to avoid looking at this thing because it's too awesome or it exceeds my capacity to understand what's happening in this moment. And I think on some level, that's not only something I experience, but at times an element of the universal human experience of in some way coming into contact with something so holy or profound, maybe even something we've been waiting for, but it comes in an instant or in a sudden moment, or it's been there and we have a sudden realization, and all of a sudden, right, someone's writing disbelief versus afraid of what will be said. Right. How will people understand this? Or maybe even if we are clear, right? I love what this person just said. Maybe even if we are clear that this was something meaningful, how will it be interpreted by others, right? So that's at one end of the spectrum. Moses was hesitant to accept. Let's see, some of these, it's interesting. Technology is so fun. So some of the messages I'm getting on my phone and other. Moses was hesitant to accept God. He said, why me, right? Exactly. Why not the next guy? It's those moments. You can rise to the moment or pass up the opportunity due to fear, right? And so then that's one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have Abraham, right? Who we could look at the text, but basically it goes like this, just to save time. Now that I'm fully reawakened and ready to go at 1 a.m. is Abraham gets this message from God, from Hashem, saying, Lech lecha, go forth to, now I have Debbie Friedman in my head, to the land that I will show you, right? And your people are going to be prosperous, and you're going to be the patriarch of a great nation, and many blessings are going to come to your people. And my reading of the text is that in that moment, Abraham is basically like, I got it, let's go, right? All right, let's like pack up the caravan. Let's get going. We have a destination. I've heard the message. I'm clear on what it is. I understand it. I believe it. I'm ready to go. Right? So very different from Moses's initial, I'm here, I'm responding to this thing, but then, right? And so all of this to say, in this moment, both in terms of our initial visceral responses we have, as well as an opportunity to slow down and respond mindfully in any given moment, when we have an insight that extends beyond our normal frame of thinking, we have an array of choices that go from pushing it away and being in complete denial to, yes, I completely accept this. This feels like my truth. And I think for a number of people, often we're somewhere in between. So I wanted to spend the rest of our session tonight talking through, looking at both expected and traditional modes or of engaging in this type of revelation and helping to make sense of it in our own lives, as well as pulling from less traditional elements or concepts in our tradition and metaphorically extrapolating on what that can mean for us in this moment. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a moment and just check in. Earlier in the conversation, someone shared related to COVID-19, personal silver lining. More things are accessible virtually, so I can actually attend more Jewish events. So true for many, and feel more connected to the community. I very much relate to that. Something that a lot of people don't know is last year when I first moved to Senegal, at first I contracted typhoid, and then I had the flu and various illnesses, and I've largely been homebound as my immune system has adjusted to this new context. And so in some ways, it's invited me to be more open, just in a practical sense, around sharing parts of my life, because I'm less subtly embarrassed about most of my reporting being from inside my home as my body continues to mend and prepare to enter a new ecosystem with greater health. Okay, so throughout our tradition, so I want to go over 4 main strategies with the time we have left, and hopefully, we can engage in conversation while we do this. And also if other people, oh, thank you. Someone said Refuah Shlema. Thank you so much. I am doing much, much better. I'm taking it a day at a time, so thank you. So where do I want to begin here? So how do we process? So are people following me, by the way, right now? Does anyone have questions? Are people getting the main gist here? Do you have any comments? Are you ready to hear I'm seeing a nod? I'm seeing a yes. Thank you. Great. Okay, good. Fantastic. Okay. So I could do these in any order. So first, let's start in honor of Shavuot with the Torah. So we received the Torah. I still continue to debate this somewhat, especially with being such a diverse people in terms of our opinions and theological perspectives. There are a range of perspectives around how we received the Torah, whether it was dictated to Moses, whether people wrote it later, whether we interpret the Torah literally or have a more historical understanding. But either way, the Torah is considered to be the central pivotal pillar of our tradition, in which many core stories and lessons and mitzvot or commandments were recorded in the Torah and written down. So the first suggestion I have for folks around processing things that are hard to process and they don't know what to deal with is a writing practice. And a reflective process through the act of writing. So I will share on a very personal note that over the years, something that I've found very meaningful and I've recently reconnected with as I've been going through my own process of revelation is filling a notebook a month of reflections. And there's a wonderful book as a resource that I would recommend to folks if you are interested in picking up a meaningful and meditative and spiritual writing practice that some of you may have heard of. Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg. Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg is a great resource for helping people initiate a new writing practice and, thank you, Julie, and accessing our own wisdom. Some things that I'll specifically say about this to make a plug for it. Some of you may already be writers, but here are some things that help me that I find incredibly sacred and powerful and transformational about writing. One is that I usually like to set a timer, and recently I've realized that if I set a timer for 20 minutes, the magic in my writing comes in the next 20 minutes after my first 20 minutes of writing. And part of what's so powerful about a writing practice, particularly if you do it by hand, but it also can be done virtually or on a computer, is that I find that it's not only a mode of expression, but that I simultaneously get to express what I'm feeling and also see what I've written. So it's both a process of expression and self-witnessing around my own narratives and perspective. And additionally, when I'm writing, as opposed to when I'm typing, often there's a delay between what I'm thinking. There's a nice healthy tension between what I'm thinking and what I'm writing. And I find that that space is a sacred space. And that in that space, there's added insight, almost like a midrash, that can come through when I'm writing, that I will go to write something. Like an example that comes to mind is the other day I got in an argument with my partner and I went to write that he made me angry. And as I was writing something else before that, in that delay, as I was writing that, it allowed space for my mind and some of my wisdom from another part of my being to come up and say, no one can actually make you angry, April. So what is the button that I'm allowing to be pushed, or, and this is my personal perspective for me, right? Or what is the thing that I'm letting, what did he touch upon that's a sore spot from my past that actually isn't about what he said, but is about something that I need to reflect and look at and get more healing around, right? So that's writing. I would love for people to write in the chat if you have reflections about writing, if writing has been a helpful process for you, if actually you hate it and you can't stand it. The next piece that I wanted to go over is around presence, and referring back to the passage with Moses around him responding to the angel or the burning bush. Thank you. Is this concept of Hineni, which I think can be taken in a few different ways, of saying, here I am. So if and when we're in a moment where we have received an insight, whether it's through someone else or from us internally, that feels overwhelming, we can use Hineni in a couple different ways. One is to get grounded and literally say, here I am. And from there also ask, what is here? What is around me right now? what is the environment that I'm in? Rather than getting wound up in my brain, what do I see that's around me? I'm surrounded by white walls. I have a plant behind me. Is a grounding practice to help to get centered and come back to the present moment. Because even if we have this insight, it's not necessarily happening right now. We have time to figure it out. We don't have to figure it out now. The light bulb has gone off, but that doesn't mean we need to care for the light bulb. We can care for ourselves first. So is to ground ourselves and say, Hineni, here I am. Maybe take a few deep breaths. Remember that our being, our beingness is grounded in a body, and check in around how we're feeling. Furthermore, taking that even more deeply into a deeper practice is around meditation, and is slowing down even further and practice the art of listening. I recently read a very short book called The Joy of Thinking Less. If anyone else has a dynamic where their mind is working all the time like mine, it might either be incredibly irritating or quite joyous and wonderful like it was for me. And one of the practices that this author recommends in this book is a practice around doing nothing. So it's a kind of a variation on meditation. And as someone who's been meditating now for over 15 years, I actually found what he wrote to be incredibly helpful and helped me access a deeper level of meditation, which is just with fewer expectations or requirements to lay down or sit or get in any posture that's comfortable for us, and set a timer and just do nothing. And as certain thoughts come up that say, oh, I need to go to the office, or I need to go do this thing, to reply to it with a dismissive whatever, which for me, as someone who grew up in the 90s when that was a popular phrase, works quite well for me. It quite soothes and engages my angsty teen who still is somewhere inside of me. And yeah. So let's see. Oh, someone asked how you spell Hineni. There are a few different ways of spelling it. One is Hineni. No, you're fine. It's transliterated anyway, so it's actually the only correct way. It's really in Hebrew, so you're fine. Let's see. Oh, someone wrote that they love that book, Writing Down the Bones. Yeah. Okay, great. So I think checking if there are any questions. If you wrote a question and we didn't get to it, feel free to paste it in again, and one of my co-moderators can help me surface that question and respond to it. So continuing on, we have a couple more pieces, and then I want to open it up to a discussion where people can type in some of their reflections. So if you have some reflections that you're thinking now, feel free to put them in the queue and I'll come back to them. The other two pieces I wanted to mention, or two or three, that I wanted to go over is Chavruta. So some of you may be familiar with this concept of Chavruta, and I mean it both in its traditional sense as well as a little bit more loosely around partnered pair share. This is one of my favorite elements of Jewish tradition, is around finding a partner or a confidant and being in conversation with each other, traditionally with a text in front of you that you debate and discuss, and where the energy and engagement is really around the text itself and pushing each other around your thinking. And so the next piece that I would say is to reach for a partner or a confidant who you trust, where you can bring this concept, not necessarily to bandy it about if it feels tender or sacred, unless you're ready for that, but to be in conversation with someone else and to contradict or shift the isolation that you might be in, and to bring someone else in you trust and be in conversation with them around it, and to help you think through next steps and what you want to do. Conversely, to reference another element of our Jewish tradition, I want to talk about for a moment about the 10 commandments and the tablets, and which is that for some of you, if you need the permission, or if you're just on the edge and you're at a place where you've received divine insights, whether from yourself or from a divine source or from God, and you're actually really clear, and you're hearing this session, you're hearing what I'm saying in the session and thinking, actually, I'm not really debating this. I'm actually crystal clear on this shift I want to make, or this goal I want to go after, that I want to encourage you to perhaps treat it a little bit like the 10 Commandments, and I'm being a little playful here, and in terms of the image of these commandments being written in stone, and be willing to say, metaphorically, in writing in stone for yourself or chiseling in stone, that this is who you are in this moment, and that moving forward, this is who you plan to be until the point at which you evolve further. So I'm pausing again to check in. And I know this might be a different Tikkun El Shavuot setup, but hopefully it's resonating with some. This is really moving. I'm going to share this. I am 40 and was ordained in a Christian church. When I let myself entertain the liminality or not knowing, I began to become Jewish. I find it appropriate. I am coming to this at the time of Shavuot. I'm glad that I've come to this realization at the time of Shavuot. So, and finally, two more options. I think it's two, or is it just one? Maybe it's just one for right now, which is a tradition or a practice, a prayer practice that often Rabbi Nachman of Breslov is attributed to this practice of hitbodedut. Is anyone here familiar with hitbodedut? You can raise your hand. I see someone nodding. Great. Okay. So for those who aren't, I love this concept of hitbodedut, which I think in some ways can potentially sort of tie into the writing practice in some ways, but it's a practice of engaging in unstructured prayer and being engaged in direct conversation with God or with divine energy around your prayers and hopes and questions that you are engaging in and asking. So if anyone else has a different definition or a different understanding, feel free to add that into the chat box. But then that's my sort of in a nutshell definition of it is for those, if you are in a more traditional mode around davening or praying regularly in community, in synagogue, or in a minyan, in a grouping of 10 Jews, and engaging in traditional liturgy and text and prayers. We also always have the option to break out of that mold and engage person to spirit or person to God in direct conversation. Thank you again, Julie, with the divine and with God. And so that concludes my presentation component of this session at this time. And I want to invite folks, if you have questions or reflections, I would love for you to add them into the chat. Generally or specifically, returning to the prior question that I asked around, particularly during this moment of COVID-19 or in general, are you experiencing either singularly or in multiple moments heightened revelation, or is it in fact the case for you where, sort of thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you have some really fundamental concerns and stressors in your life, it might be quite the opposite for you, and actually that maybe you might be receiving less revelation or connection with the divine. But this is our opportunity to be engaged with each other, and also if you have other questions around this, that would be great. And if it would be of interest to folks, depending upon how much chatting there is, I would be happy to lean into some of the content that I'm planning for an additional session I'm doing for Shavuot later tomorrow around some of my personal journey around understanding this concept and my experience of choosing to Lech Lecha, or go forth to Senegal as an African heritage Jew. So that's also something, if that would be interesting and engaging to hear on this Tikkun El Shabbat, that is an option for us as a group. So I really appreciate someone courageously and clearly stating that in this moment they're terribly angry and frustrated, that they're in a rut and in a liminal space. You're not sure how to move forward in a new and revelatory way. So, I'm happy to offer up some suggestions to you that at times I offer to some of my coaching clients in my life coaching practice and with my friends. So here's some things that I would clarify for you. And some of them you might already be aware of, but just in case it's helpful to others. One is that I find when I'm going through a challenge, it can be helpful to clarify the specific question that I'm actually seeking, and to put that out in my brain and out into space or the universe. And sort of lean back and say, I'm looking for answers to this question, and begin looking and seeing what answers come across my way, whether it's in the form of an email or a podcast or something coming up. Another thing that I would specifically say that I would recommend to a practice that I found incredibly transformational when I'm in a rut or experiencing extreme anger or pain or frustration is a practice I call the composting exercise. And it has two parts. And it involves writing. And what I do is I get a pen and paper and I write down whatever is frustrating me, no holds barred. So I have a contract with myself that my journal is private and that I keep it in a safe place where no one can read it. And I take a few minutes. It usually only takes me a few minutes because I write things that I would never say out loud to anyone really, but I just write my raw feelings about that situation and write it all out. And usually it's a half page. Usually, I mean, honestly, it takes a half page or sometimes a page. And so what the first part is to write down all of your feelings and thoughts and frustrations about what is coming up. All of it. The teacher who I learned this from called this the garbage can exercise, but I like the idea of compost better in multiple ways. But like just getting it out and on paper. And then once you feel like you'll know when you've reached the end point for you, like, okay, like, yeah, I've said everything that needs to be said the way I want to say it. I feel heard. And then you answer the prompt, or you reply to the prompt. I would love to have my supervisor, who I had that meeting with, acknowledge in front of the group that what happened in that meeting wasn't okay. I would love to feel more confident. I would love to find a way in this moment to get some clarity. I would love to find a way to feel at peace, etc. Okay. And I have found that consistently this practice works for me in one of two ways. One, I get the resolution that I was looking for. I didn't know what it looked like, but I actually surface the insight that I needed. Or I at least am feeling calm and relieved around the fact of having different options available, or beginning to get a sense of what that would feel like. Or at times that practice has been very helpful to help clarify for me that this practice isn't actually enough, and that in some way in the world I either need to find it and to turn to chavruta or spiritual chavruta, what my rabbi friend, Rabbi Julie Supan, calls spiritual chavruta, which is more just discussion with a confidant, or possibly take action in the world, that I actually need tikkun or healing in some way that goes beyond my own personal clarification. But the only way I was able to get through that was processing it, talking about what I would love, and seeing if I now feel at peace and I have a course of action, or if I actually need more help around this and it's not resolved. So some folks said, so I think I have, am I at 7 minutes left or 10 minutes left, or where am I, Julie?
We're about done. The next session starts at 9:30.
Okay. So I have 2 minutes.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I heard a couple people say that you were interested in me talking about Senegal. So to conclude, what I would say is that in my very own personal way, that I have been in this journey very deeply, and I apologize. Hopefully the session was valuable for some. Thanks folks for showing appreciation, but it's very new for me, and I'm actually applying to a Jewish clergy program to further support me on my journey around accessing these insights and being able to engage in them publicly. So for any of my hiccups, I appreciate your patience. It's very atypical for me. I'm used to normally being very, very polished, but this is a new element of my leadership. Thank you for the good luck. Yes, thank you. Hopefully I will get into the program. And what I will say with 1 minute left is, to this point in my life, choosing to move to Africa was a culmination around my own process of engaging in and honoring personal revelation. When I first came to Senegal, I had a number of insights, and it became clear to me through doing African ancestral healing work, using Jewish modalities around practicing elements of Shiva and mourning and saying Kaddish for my African ancestors. I had a realization that this was the next stage in my life, and I chose to honor that, despite all the fear and confusion that had erupted in my community around me. And I feel like I'm moving in the direction of a life of my dreams. And so with that, I will say thank you everyone so much for welcoming me into this space. I hope you have a sacred and meaningful Shavuot. If you want to be in touch with me, I can be reached at joyousjustice.com. You can go there and get a free resource I created and get on my email list. And otherwise, I look forward to crossing paths with you, and Chag Sameach. Thank you so very much.